says about itself. Islam has its sources. Do you know what sources Islam is based on? You mentioned one. You mentioned the Quran, and you mentioned now the Hadith. And Hadith has to be authentic and sound. So you can't just mention any Hadith, because Muslims will say we only accept authentic reports. Hadith are statements and reports and approvals of the prophets in his actions or deeds and so on. These are his teachings. So it has to be from an authentic, reliable source. If, going back to the first example, maybe we can work through them. Do you know what Islam says about taking away life, any life? We don't have permission to take away any life at all.
So why does...
Right. So when the court system, the judge or the executioner who is working within a judiciary, within our law system, takes away the life of a criminal, it's because they have been assigned for that specific duty by teaching, by the law that Islam, provides and regulates. So no one can just go and say, this person that did something, let's go and kill him. You have no right to do that. So they have to undergo a proper judiciary process of, trial and see. We'll come to the animal. We'll come to the animals. So they have to then found to be properly, after doing all this due procedure, that they're guilty, and then the punishment that is required from that crime, as already laid from the foundations of Islam, they will be punished accordingly. So if somebody were to kill someone, there are punishment of that criminal. In return, either his or her life is taken away, or they pay compensation to the victim's family, or the victim's family may forgive them if they want to. There are several options. So it is not something that you can take the life of another human being, for example, just like that. That's human beings. What about animals? We are not allowed to take life of any animal just like that. If we are going to consume animal products, or a certain type of them, not all of them, we can't eat everything. There are things that we just totally forbidden. For example, if you want to call them lions and tigers and hyenas and eagles, there are various types of animals we're not allowed to eat. You know about pork, right? We can't consume pig meat. So Islam restricts and gives you allowance of certain types of food from animal source. But even then, it has to be based on what? Based on that we are not only killing them for fun, like fox hunting in Britain. It's now, this tradition is dying out. You know that. So there are all these dogs that people go along with, and then they hunt foxes or rabbits, whatever, right? And they kill them merely for fun and for trophy. Totally forbidden in Islam, killing any animal like that. So if we were to, want to kill an animal, it has to be based on that a decision that we take the life of the animal in the least painful way, with the permission of God, only for consumption of food.
I can never agree with that.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe that any human being has the right to take the life of an animal. Plants, we say plants, and why not? Like, plant is alive, why can you take the life of a plant? But the thing is, plants, I believe plants are provided by God.
So are animals provided by God too?
No, because animals...
So how do you know animals are not provided by God? How do you arrive at such a conclusion?
Animals have very similar features to human beings. Not completely the same, but they have like arms and legs, they breathe, they have a heart, they have eyes, 2 eyes. Plants don't have those features.
So what do you say of a tiger or a lion eating a deer?
That's part of the way God has arranged it.
We need to understand this. When you have in the natural world lions eating deers, for example, or zebras, whatever that might be, did God provide this way for them?
He probably has a reason for maybe to keep the population at a certain level, so that the ecosystem maintains a balance.
Yeah. So now you're saying God may have provided this system already. So it's not intrinsically something that you disagree with.
Are you saying we should do the same?
No, I'm saying the reason that you have of saying God hasn't provided human beings to consume animal products, yet he has given the same thing to the animal kingdom. Animals killing each other for food. They don't just do that for fun, they eat for
But
food.
It's not all animals, they're very, like, compared, like, more than 90% of animals, I think, are vegetarian. It's a very small percentage of animals. that
And
eat
not all animals are food for us too. So as you can see, God provides in his wisdom certain nutrients for us from the sources that he provides.
Why do we need to eat? Shouldn't we have a more elevated understanding of
Are we going to have more elevated understanding than God? For example, do you have...
How do you know God has granted us permission to kill
Very good question. Excellent question. Only way we can find out is looking at the guidance from God himself, by analyzing.
How do you get the guidance from God?
So guidance comes from God through prophets and messengers. We look at what they've left in terms of the scriptures, and we analyze whether this is indeed from God or not. If we are sure and certain, like the Quran, can only be from God, and it just tells you that yes, you can eat certain type of food with the permission of God, you take their life in the least painful way, only for food consumption, then we know that we can do that because it's from God. So it's all to do with...
How do you know that's from God?
Yes.
How do you know?
How do we know? It's by analyzing it against certain criteria. Like a book of God, a scripture from God must possess within itself criteria that will satisfy one and convince one that it is indeed from God. Yeah? Let me give you an example. A book from God must describe God perfectly, with all perfect descriptions of him, without any imperfections.
They're describing God perfectly.
Okay. A God that came down and someone beat him to death by kicking and punching, and that God died. And that's it. Is that a good, perfect description of the Most High, Almighty, perfect, absolute God?
The thing is, I would argue so God is not a material body, so he can come and take the form of a material body, and he can let us do what we want with the material body.
So when you say God is not a material body or God is a material body, the infinite, who God is, in his all attributes and perfection of his attributes, and we are finite. You are trying to give a concept of God from your finite understanding of who God is.
I would argue you're doing the same.
No, I am saying only way we can understand that is by when the infinite God, the perfect God, describes himself to us. And we reason and say, okay, this makes sense or not. So I give you an example, what makes sense or not. A God that comes down and takes a bodily form of a rat, and you actually kick that rat and squash it, and then you kill it. And that's it, that's the end of this God. You would say that doesn't make sense, that this is God Almighty. Whether this God comes down as a human being, man, woman, or monkey, or an elephant, be that matter, it's still the same thing. A God that comes down and is overpowered by the creation doesn't become fit to be called God. That's one example I've given about how we can reject what God is not.
I would argue that God is infinite, right? So he can do anything he wants, right? So why couldn't he come here and for some higher purpose allow himself to be overpowered? He is not really ever overpowered because he can, if he wanted to save himself, he could have. But to teach a higher purpose, he allowed himself to be overpowered.
So this is one thing that I think...
If he is all powerful, surely he can do that.
Yeah.
If he can do anything, he can
do that. This is a very much of a mistaken understanding coming from the Judeo-Christian understanding of God, and that has been given or taken for granted. I'll give you what I mean. Is God all-powerful enough to become less than all-powerful?
He's not less than all.
Remember, what people are saying, God is so powerful. No, I'll explain. I'll explain to you. I'll explain. The question goes like this. God is all powerful, he can do anything.
Yeah.
So can God do things which are against his nature?
No.
Right, so he can't do everything then. He does things which befits him.
He can do it.
No, I'm saying God does things which befits his nature. For example, can God cease to exist if he wanted to? So he can't do that.
Yeah.
Islamically, we don't say he can't do that, we say it doesn't befit him. It goes against his nature, because his nature is he is ever living, al-hayy, al-qayyum, he's ever living. He doesn't cease to exist. So it doesn't befit to say God can cease to exist. So we don't use languages like this, oh, God cannot do this and God cannot do that. Because we say God is God with his nature, his attributes. And his attributes are attributes of perfection. Any attribute of perfection, anything opposite to that, is impossible for us to attribute to God. God is all just. So he cannot be less than just. It will be impossible for a concept of God to be given like this. God can be, unjust. It doesn't make sense, because you have already assumed God is perfect in his justice. God is perfect in his knowledge, so he cannot become ignorant.
So all of these qualities are part of God's perfect nature, right?
God's perfect nature always remains perfect nature. So any concept of God that you have, where his perfection is compromised, you know that concept is not correct.
I agree with that, but I would argue that so God would not choose to not exist, because that goes. There's no good reason. So God only does things with a pure motivation. Like he wouldn't cease to exist because he wouldn't have a reason. He has a creation to sustain.
No, I even went further. If he wanted to, remember what I said? Can, in a concept of God, that God cease to exist if that God wanted to? A God that was ever living.
No, he wouldn't want to. He wouldn't want to.
Let me tell you again. If we have a concept of God, in which God is everlasting, with no end, eternal with no beginning. And then somebody asks, if that God wants to, really wants to, cease to exist.
That's
Come on.
fallacy. He wouldn't want to.
Look. You're now saying
there will be no pure motivation for.
So
God
you're now saying
exist.
God would not want something just because you say so.
No, I'm saying you're saying that he wouldn't do a certain thing because it's not part of his nature. I'm saying he wouldn't think a certain thing because it's not part of his nature. So it's not like we're disagreeing.
So you're saying so God cannot will to cease to exist. Same thing. He cannot do that.
No, I'm saying he wouldn't.
That's what I'm saying. So he would not. Wouldn't, will not, the same thing. God will not, meaning to what? He cannot. Because he will not.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's the concept I'm saying. Because God's nature is all knowledgeable, all wise, he cannot become ignorant. It doesn't make sense. When I say he cannot, what we mean by that is it doesn't befit him, his nature of perfect knowledge. Yeah. His perfect life.
He must do things that have a pure motivation, right?
God does things which is in accordance to his nature.
Right, exactly. So his nature, why he does things. Right, and in his nature, everything he does is with a pure motivation and intention. Yeah. So, in the example of Jesus, who was you're saying he came down and he allowed himself to be beaten and killed on crucifixion. You're saying that's like allowing himself to become overpowered by his.
No, I'm saying this is a nonsensical statement.
Why?
I'll tell you why. Coming down is the concept of incarnation. What happened in incarnation is God, in his nature, what happened? Did he two things? Either two things happened. Either God lost some of his divine nature and filled this what's lost with the created nature of a human being, or he took an additional nature of the creation and retaining his divine nature. If he lost some of his own divine nature, which is impossible for God to do because that goes against his very nature, he is by his nature just, all powerful, all knowledgeable. How does he then become less than that? It makes no sense. It's a nonsensical statement. So what may have happened in Christian theology, okay, this is various incarnation models, or the models of kenoticism, whether someone believes in the ontological model of kenoticism or the functional model of kenoticism, each one has its problem, or the various other models. Now, if you look at this, he takes on another nature that he created. Now, God is God. How does he then take on another nature which is created? That's a created nature. You can't say, oh, that's me too. Imagine now I create this tripod. I make it, manufacture it, and I say, this is me. It's a nonsense. It has, okay, so when I make this tripod, can I in any way, form or shape say, this is me? Now, that tripod and me, it's me. I made it.
It would have some qualities of your character, so maybe.
No, how is it me?
Everything you do has a fingerprint.
It's mine, could be mine, but how is it me? Do you understand the difference?
Yeah, it's not you.
So, likewise, if God creates a human being, and then is born of that human being, that's a created nature that he has, then he can't say that that's me. Because what he is his nature.
Okay, let me answer. So God can do what he wants according to his nature, right?
Yeah, he does things which befits his nature.
Which befits his nature. So I think to say that coming into this creation is not possible for God.
I didn't say coming into this creation. I talked about when God comes into the creation on the forms of what? Give me an example. Krishna.
Human
yeah,
being.
a Krishna. Now, is this Krishna God or his creation?
No, that is God himself.
Right. So that means it's an additional nature. That additional nature can never be him. That's what I'm saying. That tripod can never be me.
Why not? No, wait, no. This is God. Like they say in the Hindu tradition that Krishna came from heaven.
Yeah.
And he manifested on this.
That manifestation
he also exists in he's like has a transcendental form.
Yeah.
And he has many different forms, but it's all one. It's all Krishna.
So is this Krishna just an illusion, a form? So God metamorphized. Yeah. You know metamorphosis? Are you saying God in Hinduism metamorphosizes into a man, into a flower, into a turtle, into X, Y, and Z, and still him?
In Hinduism, they believe God is in everything. Is in every atom, every molecule in the universe. Because he is the creator of everything and the sustainer of everything.
So the air has molecules. Is God there?
God, yeah.
In Hinduism, is God there?
Yeah, God is everywhere.
So God is everywhere. So you have, let's just think about it. God comes down into a form and he speaks. And God is also part of everything. So the air, the water is God. So when someone drinks water, they're drinking God because that's part of God.
Within their concept, it is God drinking God. There's no dualism.
Yeah. So when you say the water is God, what is it that makes it God?
Because he is in his creation, he expands himself as his creation.
Now, how can God expand when he's everywhere? What is he expanding to? He's already everywhere. He's already everything. You can't expand to something when you are everything. Can you expand to something when you are part of everything? You know the concept of the universe expanding.
What happens when a woman becomes pregnant?
Yeah, what happens?
Her stomach expands and then she gives birth, right?
No.
So
I am saying if God is everything, you can't expand because you're already there. It makes no sense to expanding. You're already there. Imagine now I have a dot on my hand and I say this expands to there. But God, in that concept, is already part of all of that. There is no expansion taking place. It's nonsense to say an expansion can take place because you are part of everything. You're part of everywhere.
Maybe it's just about this material universe. You know, he expanded himself within this material universe. He exists above the material universe.
No, they say you can. In this concept, you cannot have anything as above and below. He is everything.
Well,
it makes no sense.
This is a lower part. This is a lower universe. So he exists. Ultimately, he exists in the highest.
I don't understand what it says. If God is everything, what is high and low? Everything is God in that belief system. There is no such thing as high, left, right,
You're right.
above, middle.
It's just our conditioned nature. We believe that there's a difference, but really there's not. It's just weird. It's more difficult, I think, in the...
So this belief is contradictory. If they say God is high up there, it's false. Why? God is not only there, God is everywhere. So the concept of above and beyond is meaningless. It doesn't make sense in the concept of God, that God is perfect. Likewise, Christianity, as I explained, doesn't make sense. So a book from God must be describing God in his perfect nature.
Let me ask you, if there's no higher or lower, then what is, in Islam, what is the human relationship?
We don't believe God is everywhere, firstly.
So what is the human relationship with God? Where is God in Islam?
Let's tell you. Firstly, we don't believe God is everywhere, everything. God is the creator, and he creates things not within himself. Whatever he creates is external to himself. He creates creation. And what he creates is not part of him either. Okay? So whatever he creates, by definition, that creation is limited, dependent, and finite. That makes sense. Because anything that you bring to existence is limited. It's limited on its very existence on God. It's finite because it's not everywhere. It's not everything. Because God is before that thing was. And that thing that God creates doesn't replace God. So it's finite. And it's dependent on God because God brought it into existence. If you have a thing or a being like us here, and you can go backwards now. If there are things which are limited, finite and independent, then you know ultimately they have to rest on someone or something which is absolute. Not of any limit, not of any dependency, and not of any finite limitations. And that's what we say is the absolute God. He's absolutely perfect. And that absolute perfection can only be one being. There cannot be more than one being of such an absolute nature. Imagine there are two absolute such beings, whether it's in Hinduism or in Christianity, 3 or 360 million. Makes no sense. Why? Because even if there are only two, an absolute being doesn't compromise. They are absolute in their will. They are almighty, supreme, majestic. Imagine now you and I in a car, and I am absolute in my will. I don't listen to you, you don't listen to me, because I do whatever I know. I do because I know everything, and you do likewise. So on a human level, imagine now I know all the roads. Okay, I'm going to take the car which has 2 steering wheels and full controls of the car, 2 full controls, left and right. So I'm on one side, you're on the other side. I'm going to take the car to the north, and you say you're going to take the car to the south. Where's the car going to go? Even a mundane example will tell you that you cannot have 2 absolute beings operating this universe. The universe will be in chaos. The fact that the universe is not in chaos, it follows a specific pattern, is a demonstration that there's only one absolute being, and that is God.
Let me ask you, so everything was created by God.
Yeah.
So if everything was created by God, in Islam, where does evil come from?
Okay.
Did God create evil?
Sure. What is evil to you? What is evil? Let's define evil. Is there such a thing as pure evil that exists as an entity?
Selfishness.
Okay, so these are character traits. What you are now calling are character traits. For example, I can be selfish, but I can just remove that selfishness and be generous. I can be kind, compassionate, and generous, and not be selfish anymore. So it's a character trait.
For one day.
No, if I want to say, look, I want to follow the teaching of the Quran, not be selfish, then I can remove this character trait as much as I can, and that will be.
I think it's easy.
It might not be easy, but it's possible. So it's a character trait.
Saying like it's just something easy.
No. In Islam, we have a concept of jihad. Jihad is the struggle. Now, there is a jihad of the political entity called the state, when they struggle to expand the land to the people so that people see Islam. But the jihad that I'm referring to now is a jihad in-nafs. The struggle of your own inner self to constantly and continuously and consistently perfect yourself, towards perfection.
This is what all religions.
Not all religions. Some religion is based on greed. Some religion is based on exploitation, like giving interest and exploit the others while you become rich and rich. Not all religions. But when we're talking about these concepts of evil, this is, as you describe, selfishness, hatred, jealousy, envy, greed. This idea of putting down someone. These are all character traits which Islam says no to. Better yourself from all of this. So we can describe them that they are evil traits, but that's not pure evil. So God creates, in fact, He created us with two sort of understandings. Whether we follow our own desires to do good or to do these evil inclinations, good or bad. And He has given us guidance to consciously follow the good and avoid the bad. So Quran says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. Successful are those who have purified themselves, and the ones who have وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا, the ones who have actually ruined themselves are the ones who did not purify themselves. In a nutshell, you think about the opposite.
My problem with every religion is that the jihad, the internal jihad you're referring to purify yourself. You're saying in Islam the only way to practice this is according to the Quran.
According to God.
You say it's according to God, but the other religions say their way.
No, remember what we said. Remember what we said.
How do I know which one is from God?
Okay, to give you, for example, a brief understanding of where Islam fits
before you
in all religion.
One more point. If ultimately if I follow Islam and I follow the purification of what it says in the Quran to practice, and it's successful, and another person follows something in Hinduism which is also has a similar kind of purification, and they're both successful, why is it exclusive? Why do I have to follow?
Okay, I'll tell you. A brief description first. We believe God created human beings, all human beings, from the very beginning to the end of the day. God is the creator. When He created human beings, He's the one who left them with guidance too. And that guidance came from Him in the form of pure, sincere, willing submission to Him. In Arabic, it's known as Islam. A state of submission and surrender of your own self to the will of the Creator, how He wants you to live. So first man Adam, the first prophet Noah, and all the subsequent people, they all were required to follow Islam. All the prophets came with Islam. And those who followed those, they were called Muslims. So Jesus is a Muslim in Islamic understanding, so is Moses, so is Noah, so is Adam, so is Abraham, Jacob, Solomon, and so on. What happened was, as the Creator revealed guidance to them, He also gave guidance in terms of how to purify oneself. That guidance, people who followed them, they were successful ones. So during the time of Moses, whoever believed in those guidance and followed it through, they will be in the company in heaven, in paradise, in eternal bliss. So in line with this, God sent the final message as a culmination, as a completion and perfection of the same message, Islam, through Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with the last book, the guidance, called the Quran. So of course there will be similarities in which you'll find the things we mentioned about hatred, greed, jealousy, envy, selfishness, or being selfish. These all we need to abhor and get away with, and inculcate within ourselves good moral values of being kind, being just, being charitable, being passionate to others, being helpful, being supportive. All of these things, these will be common to all the religion that God has sent before, right? There might be some differences in the laws that God sent them, because laws came in with the need of the people at that time. As time progressed, there might be additional laws given to that society because that particular crime probably was non-existent before. In light of all this, Quran came with the final revelation, with the final guidance, in which guidance and laws and regulations that you need for everything in life is given. That's what makes Islam the last of all the message from God, the last book from God, the Quran. So I won't be surprised, and you won't be surprised to find that it says do not murder in another religion. Yeah? Even though that religion may now show some kind of polytheistic understanding within it. Hinduism, do they say you can murder anyone? Of course not.
Well, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it describes how the next incarnation of Krishna will be Kalki. It's going to come in 427,000 years, and they say that he will come and he will slaughter all of the Buddhists.
Yeah, that's Kalki. That's Kalki doing.
Yeah, but
Kalki is not asking. Yeah, but Kalki is not asking people in their text to you go and kill people unjustly.
Well, it's almost like it wouldn't just be him. It would be like his devotees doing it as well.
Yeah, but if that belief says they will kill anyone unjustly, then you will have to question it like,
That's why I do.
Yeah, right. So now look at Islam. When you examine the Quran, remember what you said, how do we know a book is from God? So I said the first criteria I gave you, that this must describe God in his perfection. Perfect description of God. So a book which says God comes down as a rat, I don't think Hinduism does that. They might believe in some kind of incarnation. If it did, then you would say, that doesn't make much sense of a perfect God coming down, being totally weak and helpless, and then the creation overcomes him. So perfection of God is something that you will have to see within the scripture of God. Number one. Number two, that book from God must not contradict itself, must not have errors and discrepancies and contradictions, because God is the all-wise. God doesn't give you something and say, you know what, I did this and I didn't do that. Contradicts. Or do this and don't do that. Or one message there and a totally different message there. Contradictions is from the weak and the ignorant. We are weak and ignorant. We can contradict what we say. I may have forgotten what I said earlier on, for example, and I say something which contradicts what I said earlier. But God is all knowledgeable. He doesn't contradict. So Quran, when you examine, in fact, this is what the Quran says. You know, if you were to examine the Quran with care, yeah, you would find that if it wasn't from God, there will be contradictions within it. Yeah? If the Quran was not from God, there would have been many contradictions. And it makes sense. A book that talks about history, nature, economics, biology, botany, astrophysics, I'm just giving you certain concepts of our natural world. You would expect contradictions within the teaching, because it's not coming from all-wise God. It will have all those things. But if it is from God, it will be free from these contradictions. And that's what the Quran says. Ponder deeply on the Quran. If you ponder deeply, you would find no contradictions whatsoever. So this is, in fact, a challenge of falsification of this book, given by the book itself. Thirdly, the Quran says a book like this can never be produced by other than God. Whether a whole book like it, or 10 chapters like it, 10 surah like it, or even one surah or one chapter like it. You cannot bring anything like this Quran, even if you were to human beings and mankind gathered together in unison to do this job, they won't be able to. They will never be able to produce such like the Quran. That is the inimitability challenge of the Quran.
That's just what it says in the Quran. It doesn't
yes,
necessarily mean it's true.
right. So what does people have to do? As the Quran says, if you doubt, وَإِن كُنتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِّمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَىٰ عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِّثْلِهِ وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ فَإِن لَّمْ تَفْعَلُوا وَلَن تَفْعَلُوا فَاتَّقُوا النَّارَ الَّتِي وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ أُعِدَّتْ لِلْكَافِرِينَ. This is how the ayah goes. If you are in doubt as to what Allah has revealed to His servant Muhammad, then produce a chapter or a surah like unto this Quran, like unto this chapter. If you cannot do it, seek your helpers besides God to do this. If you cannot do it, and you'll certainly not be able to do it, then fear the hellfire whose fuel is man and stone. That's what the challenge of the Quran is.
Have you read Lord of the Rings?
Have I read?
Lord of the Rings.
No.
It's a very, very good book. I don't know how it compares to the Quran because I haven't read the Quran.
Do you know what the Quranic challenge is? Bringing a chapter like unto this Quran. In the Arabic language, there are different forms of literature. Prose, poetry, the statements of soothsayers, or kahin. You can categorize them. Yeah? The Quran is totally unique in its linguistic genre. What the Quran is saying to the Arabs at that time who were masters in their language, bring something like it, because you have excelled in your language so much that you will put your best poetry and hang it on the wall of the Kaaba. You call the mu'allaqat, and the longer it says, the better the poem is. Okay, produce something like the Quran if you're able to. So when the Quran came, no, let's understand the Quran first rather than comparing someone else. Why is it that we are able to imitate Shakespeare, but we're not able to imitate the Quran? What prevents it? Because the Quran has it in its linguistic structure that it is beyond human imitation. There are scholarly, academic type level work done to demonstrate the very objective nature of this challenge. Because one can say, oh, you're just subjectively bringing a point, like the Quran may be very eloquent, very nice, very moving. None of that. Quran maybe, and it is eloquent. Quran maybe, and it is very moving and very touching. But that's not the argument of the Quran. The Quran is giving you a challenge to imitate something like it. Something like it means the way the Quran is self-structured.
So, okay, let me ask you. If it's not the eloquence, if it's not the structure, the eloquence...
It is the structure.
It's the structure?
Yes.
What about the structure?
Yes. What about it? So something like the Quran is knowing the stylistics of the Quran. You know, every author or a writer have their own style of writing. By that style, you can say, this is written by Shakespeare. This is written by Homer. This is written by Wordsworth. This is written by you, whatever, right? And you can say that particular piece is definitely from Shakespeare, or definitely not from Shakespeare, because of the way the styles. This is the literary textual criticism one we do. So when we look at certain works, we can say, look, this is the stylistic styles that the author uses, and this one is totally unique. So when the Quran came to us, it came with its own stylistics of delivery. The speech of the Quran, the way it is read, every surah or chapter of the Quran is unique in its style. You might find it strange, but it is so. None of the surahs are actually alike, but it might resonate to be the same. So that's one of the very, fascinating work that has been done. If you compare Surah Al-Layl, one of the chapter, with what's the other surah? Surah Duha or something, very close to each other. They sound very similar at the ending, but their structure is different. The Quran uses the rhetorical features known in Arabic languages such a way that it far exceeds the number of words within any chapter of the Quran. So if you have a chapter which has, say, 19 words, the rhetorical features employed within it will far exceed that number. Now, how do you match something like it is the real challenge. So when the Quran uses something that you would not be able to imagine, for example, I'll give you one example only. The Quran says, Maliki Yawmiddin, that God is the king, the owner, the master of the day of judgment. Right? What's so unique about it? When it was revealed and spoken and recited, the Arabs knew within their linguistic repertoire, they had no such a concept of someone can be the master or the owner or the king of time. You can be the king or owner of a house, of a horse, of a sword, of a land, but you can't be owner of a second, of a minute, of a month, of a year, because you can't own time. So they didn't have, just to make this point, they had no such concept that you can own time. So when the Quran came saying, Maliki Yawmiddin is the owner of a day where there will be judgment. They couldn't imagine anything like it. How do you bring something like that? Because it's not something that in the linguistic repertoire.
saying. But are you saying that concept didn't exist?
Not in the Arabic corpus.
How do you know this person that wrote the Quran? How do you know they didn't get this from India, which did exist? It existed for thousands of years.
So let's understand. Let's understand something. He's the what? Controller of time.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the Arabic corpus, so you're saying now we have documentary evidence that the Hindus passed that information to the Arabic.
How do you know it didn't?
No. You are now saying, how do you know they didn't have spaceships?
No, I'm not saying that.
I'm saying they had spaceships.
No, you're not.
I'm just telling you now, they had spaceships. So now, how would you now refute my point that they did not have spaceships? I'm saying they had spaceships.
This is not the point.
But do you see my point is?
No, I don't see it.
You are arguing on the basis of the absence of evidence. Where is the evidence? Where is the evidence that the Arabs knew and the Arabs used in their everyday language or in their poetry or in their prose that they can be king or owner of time?
I'm saying that the general population might not have had that concept in their repertoire, but there were merchant travelers who would go all the way across Asia, and I'm sure ideas and philosophies.
The idea should be documented then within the Arabian. Within the Arabian Peninsula, even within the. Muslims became very advanced. Is later after Islam came. This is what we need to really put this in place.
Scholars and people that travel from
like who? Within the Arabian Peninsula,
Socrates, he went to Egypt.
Yeah. The knowledge of Socrates.
The Egyptians were trained in Egypt. The Greeks.
Socrates, right?
Sorry, the Greeks were trained in Egypt, and they taught others in the Middle East. So this is like thousands of years before Islam. So.
His teaching, Socrates' teaching in the Arabian Peninsula, they had that teaching.
Maybe.
No, I'm not interested. A claim. We can't just say maybes. Maybe they had spaceships, maybe they didn't.
It's likely that there was.
No, it's not about likelihood. Likelihood they had spaceships. Because how would the Prophet go in space?
As a historian, you have to acknowledge the proximity of certain cultures and ideas.
You have to establish the evidence rather than saying
there is evidence. There is a lot of
So where is the evidence that the Arabic linguistic repertoire had the concepts that they can be king or owner of time? That's all I'm asking. What you need to produce is a linguistic evidence from Arabian Peninsula, from any of the cultures.
Okay, let me give you
Arab or non-Arabs.
the Sanskrit language. You know, English is based on the Sanskrit language.
I don't.
Sanskrit comes from India. Yeah? You know that. Sanskrit.
From India?
Yeah, Sanskrit.
Okay, carry on.
So English is based on the alphabet is from Sanskrit. The English language is one of its roots is Sanskrit. A lot of European.
And what is Sanskrit based on? Which language?
It's an ancient Indian language.
No, Sanskrit is based on what?
I don't know.
Because the language I speak is based on Sanskrit. And I don't think the Sanskrit English is based on Sanskrit. Maybe some words here and there, but to say the whole of, do you have evidence from the linguistic scholars?
The alphabet is definitely, there's definitely a lot of evidence.
Do you have, so the scholarly community agrees the English alphabet is based on the Sanskrit alphabet?
There's a lot of evidence here.
Okay, interesting. I mean, I can look into it. But what's the relevance?
So the relevance is, you're saying the ideas, it's impossible that the ideas wouldn't have spread from India to the Middle East.
We need evidence. Where is the evidence?
Well, it's in the Quran. You're saying that there's someone says in the Quran that he can become the Lord of time. I'm saying that's the evidence.
Your evidence is, you know what? It's likelihood.
I've
just given you.
It came from a human being because they didn't have this idea.
No, I'm saying the structure of the Quran. The structure of the Quran is not something the Arab within their customs of the language can imitate something like that because they won't speak like it. They don't speak like it. For example, if I say...
It could have been from someone who wasn't from the area. It doesn't necessarily mean it's from God.
So, even the Quran says, the Prophet has learned from someone else. Who? Where is the evidence?
Wait, the Quran says...
The Quran is in pure Arabic. That's what the Quran says. And what they're alluding to, someone like a Roman, someone who's a Persian, I'm now saying someone who is Indian. You have to have evidence for it. This is how, historical criticism works. Where is the evidence that yes, the Prophet ﷺ learned from anyone, where's the evidence? You have to show the convergence of the information, the transmission of the information, the possibility of the information. Where they knew he was growing with them for 40 years, they knew that he didn't speak a lie. He was called as-sadiq al-amin, the trustworthy, the reliable, truthful one. He grew up among them. And then when he came at the age of 40, God made him into a prophet. He went into a Mount Safa. Was that Mount Safa? One of the mountains. And he called people. And when the people came, he says, if I told you there is an army waiting behind the mountain to attack you, would you believe me? Do you know what they said? We would believe you, because we have not heard a lie from you ever. We know no lies from you. You're a truthful person. Then when he said, now I am made a prophet of God, worship none but God, then they started rejecting him. So he was already testified by his community that he was a truthful, the reliable, the trustworthy individual. So if they knew him brought like this, and you're now saying, oh, he learned from him, they would have found his teacher. When the Quran says no one taught him this revelation from God, they would have said, oh, you learned from him, you learned from her, you learned from them, and they would have discredited him. Nothing they could come up with.
Okay, it doesn't, even if it was from himself or from God. Well, I would say, there's many people who claim to have revelation from God. But
so we need to now examine the Quran. Many people claim to have revelation from God, and you can examine each one. So you can give me an example and I can examine it.
There's thousands, even today there's thousands.
No, you can examine as much as you want, but look at the Quran. If you fail to match something like the Quran, if you fail to bring a contradiction within the Quran, then the claim of the Quran still stands. These are, out of many, 2 falsification tests. In science, when we come up with something, we can say, this is how I have conducted the research. You can falsify my research by saying it's not reproducible. Quran has given us, at least in my example, I've given you 2 falsification tests. If you were to meet them, you have falsified the Quran.
I've already falsified one.
What have you falsified?
About the example of the concept of it being...
I gave you one statement from one example.
That was the only example.
If I give you the whole chapter and I give you the analysis, unfortunately it's not available in English because the nature of the work is in Arabic. If you were to show this, no. If you were to, look what I'm saying. If you were to take to an Arabic professor who's not a Muslim, so that will be an unbiased criticism, right? Or a critique. A critic will do the critique. Take it to a professor in Oxford or Cambridge or SOAS or Harvard, wherever you want, a non-Muslim Arabic expert, and say, this is a chapter and this is what the Quran is saying, bring something like it. Now, if they are able to, with their help or someone else, then you would say, we have met the challenge. 1400 and almost 40 years. Yeah, the challenge has been gone on. Why is it that people are unable to meet? Are you saying Muslim scholarship, they're all hypocrites because they know as an academic scholars that this can be matched, but they clinged on to the Quran saying it's from God?
Let me answer that question. So, religion is the same everywhere.
It's not.
Mosques exist, temples exist. It's the same everywhere. Essentially, you have the temples or mosques, and you have the congregation, you have the preachers. The preachers and the temples or mosques, they have funding, and it's also a very good way of controlling people. So unfortunately, you have the situation where people who are not necessarily religious occupy these positions of religious authority. They control the population, they control the resources, the wealth, the food, everything. And they corrupt the population and the congregation, and they interpret the religion in their own way for political gain. So what I'm saying is, essentially, the reason why, there wouldn't be any reputation of any of this is because they had too much interest in protecting religion. Every religion has a lot of interest.
Now forget about every religion for now.
In protecting.
So in Islam,
because this is the point. This is my point. Every religion is interested in protecting itself from any serious criticism or scrutiny. So
I disagree. I'll tell you why I disagree.
Okay, well let me just finish. So for hundreds of years, Islam has existed in the Middle East, and it's in recent times it's spread more. I mean, there was the Ottoman Empire was quite big. So yeah, it's been actually it's quite a large Muslim empire. Anyway, you understand. So like, the Muslim empire is quite big. So, but the thing is. The authorities within Islam, they protect the religion from serious scrutiny, and I believe that ultimately all religions are doing this. All religions protect themselves from any kind of like serious scrutiny to really analyze whether it's from God.
Okay, so let's start what I disagree with firstly. I said, even in Christianity, as an example, there are scholars who don't believe Bible is infallible, and they are scholars. They will say Bible contains mistakes, human mistakes.
Yeah,
there are even.
But Orthodox.
May I finish my point?
Orthodox Christians
May I finish?
Say they're not Christian.
May I finish?
Orthodox Muslims
May I finish my point?
Okay.
The scholarly community of a religion like Christianity, they are scholars. They may have, it's okay, brother. They may have disagreements with the orthodoxy and say, I believe there are man-made influences and there are errors and mistakes in the Bible, but there are still Christians in their belief, right? So it is not impossible for a scholar within this religious community to disagree with the orthodox belief. Christianity is an example. You find many Christians who don't believe in orthodoxy in what they believe about the Bible.
But they're not considered Christians by the orthodoxy.
They themselves consider themselves Christians. When it comes to Islam, what I'm asking you is, in fact, it's quite sad that you have labeled every single Muslim scholars for the last 1400 years to be a hypocrite because...
Not the scholars.
Excuse me, I am interested in scholars only, that's what I said. What about the scholars? Remember what I asked you? The scholarly community, are you going to say, knowing, having mastery as much as they can of the Arabic language, knowing that it can be matched and imitated, they clinged on to this concept and belief the Quran is inimitable. That's a hypocritical, totally deceptive belief for themselves. So they're all hypocrites. They knew it can be matched, but they kept on silent and they propagated that belief. Every single scholar throughout the centuries of Islam, because we don't find this. In fact, we find scholarship of Islam is they all agree in the inimitability of the Quran. So either you say they're all hypocrites. Hang on, we're talking about the Quran. Hadiths are statements.
It's still part of Islam.
Hadiths are not words of God, verbatim. They are words of the prophets spoken by the words with another person, a companion. So the prophet may say, and the companion may use a paraphrase or a synonym to explain what the prophet said. There are hadiths which are totally verbatim, lafzi, and hadith ma'anawi, by meaning. Hadith narrated by meaning, hadith narrated by words. We're not talking about the hadith, we're talking about the verbatim, word for word God's word given to the prophet, not even his own word, even for one letter or one word. That's the Quran. So when the Quran gives us this challenge, and I gave you 2 falsification tests, instead of dealing with those falsification tests, you went into a general statement like there are other religions, they make claims, and we can...
No, the point is that the Islamic scholars wouldn't disagree with the Quran because they're Muslims. So why would they...
Hang on. So the Muslim scholars, why would they not disagree if they know that it can be imitated? if they do not disagree, knowing that
They wouldn't study anything apart from the Islamic text, so why would they find anything?
Sorry, just one second.
As
Are you saying throughout the Islamic centuries there weren't scholars who were masters in the Arabic language and rhetoric?
well, it's only the Arabic language. They haven't.
No, Quran is an Arabic language.
Yeah,
So
I'm
those,
saying they haven't gone
so those
beyond the
Muslims,
Arabic language to,
the Quran is in Arabic,
like
not in
Welsh
Chinese or in English.
Chinese.
The Quran, its delivery, its miracle, its challenge is on the Arabic language, not in the meaning in other different translations. I'm sure Chinese and English are beautiful in their languages. I'm not putting down any languages. I'm saying the Quran is in the Arabic language. So when we're talking about the challenge of imitation of the Quran, it needs to be in the Arabic language. So, did those scholars throughout the centuries know that it can be imitated, and yet they believed in otherwise? Then they are hypocrites. So you are saying every scholar of Islam in the Islamic faith, they're all hypocrites.
Well, let me say this. If there was a scholar who found something that they felt was as good as the Quran or better, then we wouldn't know about them because they would have been killed.
Excuse me?
They would have been.
So you
killed.
don't know much about
If
Islamic
they
history?
said, "Oh, I found something that fulfills this challenge," they would have been killed.
Really?
Of course. The religion, you know, the
Yeah.
religious
So that really,
authorities-
that really shows we need to understand something. Having dissent from a belief, there are people who believe the Quran is created, and there are people who believe Quran is not created, and they existed side by side. One did not wipe the speech of God is created. If we believe God is eternal, His speech is eternal, there are a faction of people who believe God's speech is created, and there are some who believe it's not created, right? And they existed side by side. They did not totally wipe out everyone. They might try to do that, but it's impossible. You can't. So there's dissent where possible, and history tells us that these kind of dissent or disagreements exist. The Sunni and the Shia, in all the disagreements about the Quran, about the Prophet, about the Caliphate, they exist side by side. They haven't wiped one for the other. They exist. So your idea that if
the first thing you asked me was to find a text that's as eloquent or as...
I did not say that. You're actually saying exactly what I didn't say.
tell me.
I am saying the Quran is not claiming to be the most eloquent book. The Quran is not claiming to be the most moving book, but it is moving and it is eloquent.
Yeah, so what was it that was the...
It is the challenge of the Quran to bring a chapter like it, to make a chapter like
So
it.
that's different.
For example,
whether you believe it was created or not.
For
That's
example,
different. Because
if
that's
I were to
the
ask
truth
you
that is-
to produce a sonnet of Shakespeare, you're going to match the stylistics of the sonnet, right? That's how you're going to imitate it. If you bring a sonnet, 14 words or 14 lines, at least you're attempting to imitate it. But if you bring only 5 words and 3 lines, that's nowhere near the Shakespearean sonnet, because that's not what we understand by a sonnet of Shakespeare. If the Quran has a stylistic feature on its own, you have to bring something like it, like the Quran, not like the Bhagavad Gita of the Hindus. Then you're matching the Bhagavad Gita. So, has anyone? There are many attempts on the internet today. Many attempts. Why have they failed? Why are they failing? That's the question you should be asking the scholars of Arabic language who are not Muslims. You should be asking them.
Do you know Welsh? Can you speak Welsh?
No, I can't.
Then how do you know there's not something in Welsh that's equally as profound as the Quran?
You see the problem you're doing? The Welsh
What's the problem?
art or literature, they're not saying it's inimitable. If there is a poetry or a piece of literature in any form, and then says it's inimitable, I can go and find an expert in Welsh and say, can we match that or not? And I'm sure human speech is imitable. Shakespeare has been imitated. But when it comes to the Quran, in the Arabic language, in the Arabic stylistics, there are books written called the Stylistic of the Quran, by Professor Abdul Rauf, for example, in the English language, an academic. So it is not a secret what are the stylistics of the Quran. The book that I'm referring to is called Mu'jiza by Dr. Bassam Sa'i. Okay, so he's a 2-volume. I mean, these are professors and doctors scholars I'm giving you to look at objectively how the Quran gives an objective challenge to bring something like the Quran. If people were able to, they should be able to match it. Why is it that people are failing? Find an academic scholar today, anywhere from the world, who would say, yes, this is chapter 1 of the Quran, and this is a particular piece of imitation, and this is how it's imitated. Do that. Or chapter 114, or chapter 5, whatever.
If you look at certain intellectuals from, like, say even 100 years ago in London, like Oscar Wilde, his words are almost inimitable. You could say they were inimitable.
You can give me an example, and I can get someone who can imitate it.
No, you wouldn't be able. I doubt you. Like
Hang
the
on.
consistency of his prose.
Do you know what imitable means? To imitate the style. So if you bring a piece of poetry from someone, you can imitate that style.
But the
And it's
style is
been
one
done.
thing, but there's also context and the depth of meaning and the.
No, when you look, we are not asking you to replicate it exactly word for word, letter for letter. We're asking you to imitate this structure and bring something like it with depth of meaning. With depth of meaning, you can do that too.
The picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde.
No, it's been done. If you say inimitable, bring a piece and I can do that for you. If I can't do it myself, I can get someone who can do it. If you really think it's inimitable,
Okay, next Sunday,
Yeah.
if you can bring something.
no. You bring something and with a claim
I'll bring you the
that
picture
it's
of Dorian Gray by Oscar
that it's
Wilde.
inimitable, and then take it to some. How big is it?
It's big.
No problem. So whole book needs to be imitated.
Yeah.
So you can take to any professor of English language and they will agree with you it's inimitable, right? Why don't you do that first? This is your homework. You go and speak to or write to the experts in the English language and that literature of that time frame and get a statement from them that this piece of, who's the author?
Oscar Wilde.
Oscar Wilde, that this piece is a masterpiece that is inimitable by humans. Yeah? Can you? No. You made a claim. I would like some agreement with people that have done so.
Yeah, I could probably find. I'll come with a list of quotes describing it as inimitable.
Yeah, bring it. So now, the Quran, bring some quotes that it's imitable, that people can imitate it. For the Quran.
It doesn't prove it's from God because Oscar Wilde didn't write from God.
Hang on. This Oscar Wilde claim it's from God. But the Quran does. Quran makes a claim.
How do you know it wasn't from God?
Does Oscar Wilde claim it?
Why did he have to? Why would he have to claim it's from God for it to be from God?
Hang on. If a book is not from God and you believe it's from God, even though it doesn't say so. Very nice reasoning.
Well, the thing is, he might have been too humble to say this is from God. How do you know he wasn't just so humble that he didn't say this is from God?
So he's so humble, he writes a piece that you think is inimitable. Okay. Would you mind telling me these stylistics and the structures within that Oscar Wilde's piece?
I'll bring you the book.
No. You tell me the stylistics of Oscar Wilde, that particular piece. Give me the stylistics of it. So what I mean by stylistics, all the features of that piece, objectively, and I will then find someone, and you, of course, you're going to bring people who will testify that's inimitable, that no one can match something like it, right? So there's two things. The feature of the stylistics embedded within these works of Oscar Wilde. Yeah, you'll say, look, for example, when he writes, he uses these synonyms in that way, he uses a verb in that way, he uses a noun, a preposition in that way, he uses this terminology in that way. So there has to be a specific stylistics that can be found within that, and that cannot be matched. So if somebody writes something like this, the bestest of the best, you'll say, using the language bestest. Can you use bestest? So if I produce another work like this, this is the goodest, rather than good and best goodest, can I do that? Not. If I can find poetry we're able to do that, you will say it's imitable or not. Let's do that. But come back to the Quran. Why are the Arabic experts saying it's not possible?
Because they don't read other texts.
They don't read other texts. It is to do with the Arabic language, my friend. We're not talking about English. So this is something that the Quran brings as a falsification test, and the way you come along is, what about Oscar Wilde?
See,
Oscar Wilde doesn't even claim, the Quran claims it.
It doesn't matter.
The way to disprove the Quran is by engaging with the challenge of the Quran. If a scientist brings along and gives you a theory, look, this is my theory. You can do this experiment and you can reproduce it, or you can falsify my research. Are we now going to go and do another research, something totally different, to disprove the research that scientist is claiming? Of course not.
So let me ask you, say what you're saying convinces me and I decide that I want to follow, I feel like I should follow Islam. You know, say I can't disprove what you're saying or whatever. Does that mean that I should follow Islam even though I don't agree with everything in the Quran?
Remember, that's why, thank you for reminding. I asked you, as you started by saying, there are many religions out there. You agree with some and disagree with some. You disagree with something from Christianity, disagree something from the Quran, and that's how I started the conversation, correct? So I asked you, what are the things that you disagree with? You say eating meat, for example. Now, what are the other things that you disagree with the Quran? Let's explore some of those things.
Well, ultimately, it's not necessarily about specific details. It's just the fact that I can never agree with a religion that believes that it is the only religion that can lead you to God. So
Did I not explain that to you already? During the time of Moses, the Prophet, peace be upon him, whoever believed in the message, the teaching of Moses, and they subscribed and followed that as much as they can and then die on that state, they will go to paradise in heaven. So is Islam exclusive in that nature? No. But the only difference I'm saying is, whenever the current messenger is, you have to follow the current messenger, because the current guidance is the most current, the most complete for you. So if when Jesus the Prophet came, peace be upon him, and the Jews, the children of Israel, they said, we are not going to follow you, we are going to stick to Prophet Moses, they will not be saved. Why? Because it becomes obligatory to follow the most current messenger, Prophet of God. In Islam, through Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is the most current, and he will be the most current until the end of the world, because there will be none other after him. So it is obligatory to find out about this religion and then follow it, and not follow any other religion that was before, because this is the finality of the same message God has sent. So I'm not interested in talking to you. Sorry, I don't like you to get involved. Excuse me. This particular gentleman can have his own stand talking to himself, like he was there doing there. There are certain people I try to avoid engaging with, and for a reason. Those people who have the utmost hatred and bigotry and enmity within their hearts about Islam, I say, look, you have that for you, but don't come to me. Don't come to my discussion. You can have your discussion, you can have your own discussion, speaking to the air and the pigeons if they're around, like you did earlier on, no problem. But not to my platform, please. I don't entertain that. Sorry, not interested. So now, my friend, so when we are saying, when you want to examine the Quran and says exclusive claim, it's because it's the same message throughout, consistently provided by God, and being the last one of them. So you have to follow that. So if I want to ask you this question. If God revealed his last message to you, made you the last prophet and the messenger, yeah? Should I object because you are European and I say no, I'm going to follow the messengers before? Or whatever reason, should I object? What would be?
No, if I was you, and so say you were the last messenger.
No, you are. Imagine God made you the last messenger. No, I want to make you.
You're the prophet.
Excuse me. Imagine God made you the last prophet and the last messenger, and gave you the last book. Imagine. Yeah. Now, what would be my objection to reject you? How am I justified to reject you and follow something else?
Okay, I can answer that. The basis on which you should reject someone like that is if they say you can never attain heaven or God you can only attain God through following my teachings.
So God made you the last messenger, and I follow that man who says do whatever you want to do. No. So what's the point of God making you the last messenger? How is that helpful to
I
me?
wouldn't claim to be the last messenger.
No,
'cause I know
if
that
God
anyone-
made you...
No, I believe that anyone who has a pure consciousness can teach the truth.
No.
about
If God
the-
makes you the last
morality.
messenger as an agent to convey the message to everyone, God makes you that. Rather than giving every human being their own conscience, as you said, He makes
What's wrong
you...
with having your own conscience?
Is your conscience same as mine in everything?
Conscience.
Is your conscience same as mine in everything? Is his conscience, her conscience? Exactly. So our conscience can be different
Yeah,
in
but
terms of our
it's what
upbringing,
it's what
our
guides us.
education.
Yeah.
Yep.
But
So
it's what guides
if
us
you left,
to act morally, no?
please, if you agree with me just now that we may have different understandings of reality based on our conscience,
Yeah.
then how can you make our conscience the arbitrator of truth? Because one person may say something
Your
and not...
perception is what defines reality.
Okay, now
Your conscience
imagine,
is what guides your
imagine a Hindu comes along and says,
Are you
God,
listening to- You're not listening to me. Right?
I'm telling you, from their conscience, God is a rat. God is everything, including the rat. And you and I say, no, God is not a rat. Or I say God is not a rat and God is not everything. Now, where is the truth? If the conscience of individual people are the arbitrator of the truth, now you tell me, one person says God is everything, including being a rat, and another person says God is not everything. Where lies the truth?
Well, that's not what he was asking me for.
No,
He was
I'm asking you now.
If I was the last prophet.
Now, I want to know, where is the truth? If conscience, our own thought processes, our own understanding, speculations, intellectual, endeavors are the arbitrator of truth.
Let me just go back to the point he was making before, because I feel like we've reached a conclusion here. Ultimately, you asked me if I was the last.
If God made you the last prophet,
If He made me
to convey the message.
He would make me the last prophet.
No,
I don't believe in.
it's
the
all about
last
I don't be.
prophet, so
If
I
God,
never-
if
I never
God
believe
in
in-
His wisdom,
Yeah.
okay. Do you believe God sent prophets and messengers?
Yeah.
Why?
Because ultimately, human beings, it's a bewildering world, and there are people that help guide humanity. I believe. So
Let's understand this point. You believe God sent prophets and messengers when people could have individually, by their own self, receive guidance and live a life as God wants, or not?
through their own personal endeavour to enlighten their consciousness and develop a relationship with God, to find out the truth.
So you don't need a prophet and messenger.
No, I'm saying how they would become prophets.
No. If God's, you agree, remember, this is your stance. God sent prophets and messengers. Now, why do we need them in the first place? Why can now individually, now I'm using your arguments, why can people not individually know the truth about this world?
They can.
Yeah? So you don't need prophets and messengers.
Yeah, well-
So why did God send them in the first place?
You need prophets and messengers.
I don't understand why you need them when you can achieve the
If you're
truth
lost,
yourself.
you can take guidance from them.
No. If you can achieve the guidance yourself without the prophets and messengers, why were there need for prophets and messengers?
Ultimately, we need guidance, but it's not like you can't realize the truth on your own.
So you're agreeing with me. To achieve to the totality of the truth about who you are, where you come from, where you're going, what you're supposed to do, who is God and who's not, whether there's a day of judgment or not, whether there's heaven and hell or not, you cannot achieve all of this truth by your own self.
Why do you need to know about all of those details when you can just
If the reality
pray
is,
to God, be a good person,
look,
and-
if the
and
truth,
salvation at the end
no,
of life.
that's not the question.
What's wrong with that?
If the truth is there is a hell and there is a heaven,
Yeah, but if you're a good person, you don't need to worry about this.
wait. If the truth is whatever I do determines where I end up, heaven and hell, then a sensible person like you and me should not just say, it doesn't matter. I would make sure that I don't want to end up in hell. You would make sure I don't want to... Okay.
We disagree about the
One moment.
process behind
One
ending
moment.
up in hell. No,
If you know-
Let me talk, because you keep talking and you don't let me talk, so let me just...
Oh, I apologize. I don't let you talk.
Well,
That's
you keep
news to me.
interrupting me when I try to...
Oh, I apologize. I keep interrupting to you.
You do.
We had a nice conversation so far, and now you're coming up with, I don't let you talk, I don't interrupt.
You keep-
I do apologize.
I've let
Please
you
talk.
talk for like 90%
Please.
of the time.
Oh, 90% I talk. I mean, please carry on. Please talk. Please talk. Talk, and when you finish, just say I'm finished, and I can talk.
So ultimately, when someone realizes the truth, they don't necessarily need to have a guide or something like that. You don't need a prophet necessarily, but the thing is, sorry, say what you're saying before, because it's
Okay. My question would be, if we don't need prophets and messengers for our guidance, for the truth of reality,
Right.
I have two questions. Why have God created us? And is there heaven and hell a place of eternal punishment or eternal joy and bliss? I want to know the truth of this matter. How can I know that?
Yeah, this is it. So you don't need to worry about if you're a good person. So what we
That wasn't my question.
Yeah, okay, but I'm going to answer it in a roundabout way. So what I was going to say was we both have a fundamental disagreement, and I'll explain to you what it is. So you believe that the way to avoid going to hell is through following the Quran and the words of the Prophet Muhammad to achieve salvation, right? And to avoid going to hell. That's what you believe, is that right? Do you agree with that?
Carry on. I'm not going to interrupt you. Carry on.
I'm asking you a question. I'm asking you a question. Do you?
I explained that already to you, how we go to heaven and hell.
So that's what you believe. Okay, so
I explained that already, not what you just said now, but I've already